Welcome to Technically Speaking, beyond Bitcoin, blockchain, cryptos, smart contracts, oh my. You're going to hear a wonderful speaker tonight. I'm Alfred Marcus, and I'm going to give a special welcome to many of my ex-students who I haven't seen in a long time. Thank you very much for coming. If you don't know me, I teach in the Management of Technology program. I'm also a professor at Carlson School, and I teach the strategy class, and I also teach in the MST program. So I've had students, there are students here from many of these programs. I'm very happy to see them. How many of you here are ex-students from... wonderful to see all of you return. How many of you are not? So the ones who are not, how many of you know about the Technological Leadership Institute from? So I'm going to go through. I'm supposed to do an advertisement for it first. I'm going to do this very quickly since most of you are already knowledgeable. We develop global leaders for technology intensive industries. We have a variety of programs, 3 master's programs. We have a master's program in management of technology, which is in many respects an MBA for people who are interested in technology intensive kind of program. We also have a master's in security studies and a master's that's related to the medical device industry, specifically for the medical device industry. These are the 3 degrees. We also offer graduate minors and short courses of various kind. And this is our distinguished speaker, who I met a couple years ago when I gave a talk at Fordham University. And we had lunch, and he totally blew me away about what he knew about blockchain. And I said, this is somebody we have to have come speak about blockchain. Ben has just told me about how he became interested in blockchain recently and about the amazing programs that they have going on at Fordham on blockchain. I think they're, from everything that I know, they would be among the most leading programs in the world. Ben has a PhD from University of Michigan in strategy from the business school, and has won all kind of awards for his teaching. But you're here to hear him talk about blockchain tonight. He has a book contract, which he told me about just recently, where he's going to write a book about blockchain. And without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Ben, and he'll speak for about an hour, and then make sure that you have questions, tough questions, that you have prepared to ask him. Okay, let's give him a round of applause.
Thanks so much. I'm really excited to be here. When I met Alfie, we had a great conversation, and he invited me to come out here. It's wonderful that Minnesota is able to have me, and TLI. It's fantastic to be here. Thank you so much. So to begin with, how many of you actually own crypto? Oh, good. That's actually amazing. And I asked this question for 2 reasons. The first is, if you do own crypto, you know what a pain in the neck they are, right? Just owning them, the entire experiences of trying to get them and control them. And there's a lot of issues with user interface and user experience, what we call UI, UX in this space. But the other reason why I asked this question is because most people, when they think about blockchain, they think about cryptos. And cryptos are actually just one tiny part of the blockchain space. When I teach my course at Fordham, I don't even get into cryptos until the 3rd day of class. Okay? So I can give you a little perspective on things. So a couple of years ago, the World Economic Forum put out a technological tipping point survey. It's 800 executives and expert respondents, and they asked them about blockchain and what their estimates were in terms of usage. 58% of respondents predicted that 10% of global gross GDP will be stored on blockchain by 2027. So my little blue straight line here, this is not statistical significant or anything like that, but you're essentially looking at $100 trillion global GDP by that point, and we're going to have about 10 trillion, which is about half the United States GDP on blockchain within about 9 years now. A more recent survey is the HSBC Trust and Technology Report. 59% of respondents says, I have never heard of this technology. But more importantly, 80% admitted they don't understand blockchain even if they have heard of it. So everyone's in good company. I think most people's understanding of blockchain and crypto just come from headlines you see in the newspaper or online. We're going to try to dig into the technology for you so you can wrap your brain around it, and I hope it's informative to you. In that second survey, a lot of different questions they asked. This is what is your level of agreement or disagreement with each of the following statements regarding blockchain? 68% of the respondents said that they would lose competitive advantage if they don't adopt blockchain in their industry. And this is across all sorts of industries. And the second one is that they actually believe that blockchain would disrupt their own industries. Okay? Where is it that blockchain would be used most? The top two are supply chain with 53% and Internet of Things, IoT. And that's going to be really important when we start talking about smart contracts. And so I have a couple of slides at the end to kind of explain how they work, and that way you can get a holistic view of the space. Okay, so what is blockchain? I have three definitions here. In blue, the Bank of England's definition. Technology that allows people who don't know each other to trust a shared record of events. Pretty reasonable. Purple, Neil Dennehy from AidTech in Dublin said, blockchain is like writing on a piece of paper, then holding it up and saying, you see what I wrote? Okay, that's his definition. And Miko Matsumura of Pantera Capital, which is one of the top venture capitalists in the space, said, it's the shady database you use when you don't trust anyone. All right? You can see the mentality of each of these actors when you look at this definition. But fundamentally, what is it? Okay? It's a ledger, right? It's a ledger. It's a globally distributed ledger of transactions, okay, managed by a network of computers, not a central CSOP, not a central systems administrator. Okay? Any computer can enter or leave the network without compromising the database. That's really important. Okay? Importantly, you can also verify the ledger by rebuilding it from scratch. So if you wanted to go and verify Bitcoin's history, you can literally download the Bitcoin protocol. It was written in C++ code. It's not that long. And you can run it on your computer, and you could rebuild from the very first Bitcoin that was ever mined all the way to today. And you can verify everything yourself if you want to with a public blockchain like Bitcoin. Okay? So this looks complex. I'm going to try to break it down here for you. So the first part of this crypto technology stack is the blockchain itself. This is what they call an immutable, decentralized ledger of transactions authenticated through public key cryptography. Very, very wordy. Okay? The second one is the protocol. These are the crypto economic rules, or the monetary policy that decides how people get paid, who gets paid, how we resolve issues of conflicts and stuff like that. The third layer is a token. You might have heard of Bitcoin. These are the financial incentives that ensure the rules are followed. The fourth up here is what's called a DApp, or a decentralized application, just like you would have an app on your phone, but it's actually going to be accessing things on the blockchain. And the fifth one that I added is smart contracts, and I'm going to talk about those in a second. It does not matter what blockchain system you are talking about. Every blockchain system must have only two of these things. They must have only the blockchain and the protocol. That's it. There are lots of projects that do not have tokens at all. No cryptos whatsoever. And in fact, in industrial level projects, enterprise level projects, many of them do not have cryptos at all. They don't need them. Okay? Not every project is going to have an app or a DApp, and not every project is going to have a smart contract. But every single blockchain, no matter what system it is, if it's private or public, must have a blockchain, and it must have the rules that essentially run and help guide the blockchain. Okay, so these are the key dynamics. All right, you got a bunch of computers around the world. Everyone holds a copy of the ledger, and they agree to be bound by certain rules. Those rules are called the protocol. Okay, those computers, they're called nodes in a network. Okay, support the network by always being on call to do transactions in the system. So you could have 10,000 people. Everyone's running the protocol together, and everyone's going, choose me, please. I'd really like to do some work, but they're running their computers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, on call. Okay? They want to either handle transactions themselves, or if they do not get chosen to do the work, they have to update their own ledger with what other people have done if someone else gets selected. Those are essentially the rules of running these decentralized systems. Does that make sense to everyone? Okay. So what does this mean in terms of the vexing issues that drive public blockchains? First, you need some way to determine who among the thousands on call will be selected to do the transactions. 10,000 people, who's going to be chosen? That's the first thing you got to figure out. You need some way to pay them for the electricity and computing power that they're putting into supporting it. Okay? Possibly, there are some systems that pay people when they're on call, but Bitcoin, for example, does not pay people if they're on call. They only pay them if they do the transaction. So that's a flaw of Bitcoin. There are people who run Bitcoin protocol and never, ever, ever are selected. And they just have huge electricity bills, and you're a sucker for only so long until you basically say, I'm not doing this anymore, and you stop doing it, and what's going to happen is you're going to start to see some consolidation. And there are concerns raised about that issue. So there's other projects that have actually said, well, this is a problem. Why don't we make sure that we can always pay people who are on call? So when they set about to design their protocol, they said, we're going to set aside some of the money that will always go to pay everyone in the system, okay? And we're going to set aside some of the money to pay the person who does the transactions, him or herself. Does that make sense? And a good example of that is Dash. It's another cryptocurrency. Okay? You need some way to handle conflicts or innovations, and you need some way to handle sabotage and stupidity. All these are common. And most of the innovation that's happening in the blockchain space and public blockchains is happening because really smart people are thinking of the craziest ways that the protocol could get hacked. And they say, well, what if I do this and someone does that and they attack in this way? Oh, we need to fix that hole. And you now have a whole bunch of developers around the world who put in time to fixing the holes. Okay? And all the public blockchains, all of the work that they're working on, all these contributions they're making are all available publicly. If you go to GitHub, it's a website. It's now owned by Microsoft, of all people. And if you go to GitHub, you can actually go and download all of the contributions that people are making. You can track the number of contributors and when they're committing to do work on different protocol problems. It's quite exciting in terms of joint work in this space. So everyone follows this. You got a bunch of computers and everyone wants to do work. Not everyone gets to do work. And you're always under a threat of attack. Okay? So I thought I'd start with 4 examples of how people are using blockchain. Because everyone's heard of Bitcoin, but we're going to set aside Bitcoin for a second. And we're going to talk about AidTech, SolarCoin, Green Chain, and Tiye Foods. AidTech. What's the problem they're trying to solve, right? Because in the end, if you're not trying to solve a problem, no one's willing to pay for it, right? So what's the problem? Their problem is fraud, waste, and abuse and corruption in humanitarian aid distribution, okay? The Secretary General of the UN, Ban Ki-moon, estimated 30% of all aid is lost to fraud, corruption, abuse, and these types of things. Obviously, there's the problem of people need aid in the first place as well. That's ultimately what they're trying to do. This is a for-profit firm, and it's based in Dublin. The COO is the gentleman that I mentioned earlier with the purple definition of the blockchain. Right? So their solution is a private blockchain solution with no tokens on exchanges. You can't go to a website and buy the tokens to support this project. Okay? They work with the UN Development Program, UNDP, and the Red Cross to distribute aid. They use plastic cards with QR codes on them. And they've done these pilots with Syrian refugees in Europe. So they go to a refugee camp, they meet someone, and they're like, okay, so we're going to take a picture with this iPad. They take a picture of the person's face with the iPad. They pull out the QR code. They take a picture of the QR code. Now the identity is linked with that QR code. And then they say, you can go over to that grocery store and you can purchase food with this card. And when they go to the grocery store, they pick up the canned goods or the vegetables that they want. When they scan them, their face pops up. You can verify it's the person who's supposed to have the card. And they had to introduce the face things because when they first did this pilot in Serbia, within 3 hours of distributing QR codes in the refugee camp, there were already knockoffs on the street in Serbia, right? 3 hours. And they figured it out because the Red Cross red was a different tint of red. They didn't match the Pantone colors for it. Okay? So they actually had to innovate on, we have to connect it to the face. Now, if you're a donor to AidTech or to Red Cross, on their website, you can go there and you can say, okay, well, I want to donate to a family. You can choose a family, or you can just say, I just want to donate to anyone. You can actually select the people you want to donate to, and you can use your credit card. Let's just say I'm going to donate $100. I can designate of that $100 a breakdown for food. Let's just say 50% goes to food, 25% goes for transportation, 25% goes for healthcare. Okay? And so that becomes loaded on that, onto that QR code. When that family gets it, they can take it to that mother and say, now that we've linked this, you just go to the hospital and you can get the immunizations for your girls at the hospital. Okay? So what they end up doing is they actually create a digitized token that represents one immunization. Okay? So they use tokens, but you can't buy them like you can a Bitcoin. Okay? And all of this information is recorded on the blockchain. So when a transaction actually occurs, they have all the way down to the barcode level. So we could tell the donor, this person bought a Coke with it, or we could just tell them they bought food and beverages. The level of acuity that you provide to the donors is up to you. And each of the projects they do are specific to that organization who has hired them to do so. It's pretty cool, huh? What's amazing is among the UN developmental goals, the Sustainable Development Goals, there's one called 10C here. By 2030, reduce to less than 3% the transaction cost of migrant remittances and eliminate remittance corridors with costs higher than 5%. AidTech already meets this UN goal, and it did so last year. Right? It's a 2030 goal. They're already delivering aid at less than 3% using blockchain, with full transparency and full accountability of how the money is being used. It's remarkable. There's a reason why these guys have won awards for their work. Solar coin. The problem that they identified is that externalities like pollution, military interventions, et cetera, are not priced into carbon-based energy sources, slowing the adoption of competing zero-carbon sources. So their solution is, if you have a solar array, and I actually have it here. I think I have a picture. Okay, good. Yeah, so if you have a solar array panel running on a Raspberry Pi system, they cost about $15. Okay, most of these solar array panels, modern solar array panels, are actually IP or internet ready. So you throw on one of these Raspberry Pi systems, you register on their system, you tell them what is your solar coin address, that's for your wallet, what's the make and model and part numbers, etc., what's the location and longitude and latitude of the installation, and what it does is attempting invert API call, waiting for another 0.01 kilowatt hours to be generated. We'll check again in 86 seconds. So every 86 seconds, the solar coin system pings that solar array that you've registered, verifying the actual electricity that's being generated by that solar panel array. When you get to 1 megawatt hour, they donate 1 solar coin into your wallet. Thank you. It's a reward token. Okay? Now, what this means is that it creates a new vehicle for people to support solar energy. Normally in the United States, you would say I would buy an offset carbon credit or something like that. Well, what you can do now is you could just go to one of these exchanges and buy solar coins. If you buy the solar coins, you drive up the price, and the people who own them, because they've been amassing them because they run solar arrays, can then sell them for cash and put that money back into their R&D, use it to cover expenses, whatever it happens to be. Right? And it doesn't sound like a big deal, but I was a couple of months ago, I was asked by Bain Consulting in Beijing to consult on how how it is that China can increase the amount of how would you say this, contributions that people make. So in China, there's not really the giving culture that we have here in the United States. I mean, in America, every year, this time of year, people are writing checks for contributing to their universities and to all these different causes they like. But in China, the bank consultants were saying, this is not a common practice here. And we're wondering how blockchain might change that. And I said, well, this is a great example. Because what you can do is use the market mechanism for people to buy solar tokens, and they can actually support solar energy by buying it and using the exchanges that exist in order to get the same level of contributions. Right? So this opens up new avenues for how people might actually donate to causes that they like using the market. Okay? So that's the second example. Third example, grain chain. So grain chain recently completed a pilot in northern Mexico and southern Texas. Okay? And the quandary they were trying to fix was kind of multiple problems here. The first is that when farmers in Mexico take their grains to a grain silo to have it measured, okay, many times the person who runs the grain silo will steal some of the grain and then keep it and sell it in the black market. Right? So that's one problem. They'll steal from them. The second thing that they might do is they might steal from them and replace the good grain with rotten grain and just kind of mix it up. So the weight's the same, but the quality has been degraded. And the third problem is that Mexican farmers, even when the custody of the grain is transferred to a new buyer, it can take 6 months for them to get paid. And so this is the problem that they're trying to solve with blockchain. So what they've done is they've used off-the-shelf parts to create a device that measures 12 different dimensions of the grain when it comes in. When the truck arrives, no human is allowed to touch it. The devices measure water levels and quality levels, and is there any mold spores and all of these things. And if these conditions are met, then it basically checks off all the lists. Okay, this is the level, this is the level, this is the level, this is the... Now, if a buyer already knows what they're looking for in terms of minimum quality levels, they can actually use a smart contract to kind of just have it sitting there. And if it meets all the conditions of the smart contract, the grain is automatically transferred custody to that owner once the conditions are met. And then the payment is made directly to the farmer immediately with these grain chain tokens, which are convertible into dollars. Pretty neat, huh? Okay. Tiye Foods. This is one of the largest implementations of blockchain on the planet. And no one has heard of it. That kind of tells you what the media's understanding is of the space. Right? So the problem they're dealing with is food safety. Illness, it's responsible for illnesses in 1 in 10 people, and a deaths of about 400,000 people per year globally, most of whom are children. So what Tiye Foods does is from farm to market, at every stage, logs in information using things like QR codes and various type of tags, okay, throughout the entire supply chain. Okay? So they do, right now in Vietnam, 12,000 pigs a day, 200,000 chickens, and 2.5 million eggs every day in Vietnam using this system. 400,000 transactions a day. That's almost twice as many transactions as Bitcoin has. And no one has heard of this project. It's actually a German company, and they are now, they just signed an agreement to do a project in, I want to say it was Montana, with some Montana ranchers to try to also do this. So essentially what they're doing is they have these QR codes, and when the animal is still alive, the vet tech shows up, and the vet tech is going to, for example, use an antibiotic. They have to scan the antibiotics. They scan their vet tech ID. They scan the animal, do the injection. Right? And at every step that the animal is either treated or fed, what it's being fed, are they being fed corn versus wheat? Well, they're keeping track of all this information. Right? All this is going into the blockchain. When the animal is transferred to a different location, this is a truck actually, once the animal is put inside, they zip tie it closed, scan it again, that goes onto the blockchain. When they get to the location, they cut that, rescan, et cetera, all the way through slaughter. When it gets to the grocery store, they put QR code stickers that match both in color and in number with the original animal. This is eggs. It has a QR code on it. Okay? So the companies who are using the system to keep track of essentially the provenance of their product are paying money to Tiye Foods to use the system. So they're basically buying these tokens, okay? And they have to use these tokens in the system in order for it to work. Then what Tiye Foods does is on the downstream side is if customers use it, they actually reward the customers with the tokens that the companies paid for. So you have on one side the utility tokens acting from the company side, and then you have the reward tokens like the solar coin happening on the end side. And their app, they made it so that their app works with the equivalent of like WhatsApp, the most popular app in Asia. Well, there's equivalent type of apps like that where you can just use your own app and pull this information up in the grocery store. And when you use it, you're rewarded with these tokens. You can use them as like coupons to get discounts at the grocery store. Both sides, upstream and downstream. Pretty cool, huh? So if you kind of put all these together, aid tech doesn't have a token that you can buy in on an exchange, but it has a client-specific token. 1 token equals 1 immunization. Solar Coin has a reward token. 1 megawatt hour is 1 token. Grain Chain has a third-party payment token backed by USD, and Tiye Foods has the utility token from the firms and the reward token going to the customers. Are they available on exchanges? Aid tech, no, although they just announced they're going to try to raise some money through a different token launch. Solar Coin is. Grain Chain is not on exchanges yet. Tiye Foods is. Do they use a smart contract? No, no, yes, yes. And extras, QR-coded plastic cards, Raspberry Pis, and a data logger, measurement instrument from off-the-shelf parts, and QR codes and mobile apps. Right? Lots of innovation happening across completely different spaces, from humanitarian efforts to, supply chain. In the beginning, there was Bitcoin. Yeah. And we don't care about Bitcoin because it's worth $20,000 or it's worth $6,000 or it was worth $50 at one point. That's not why we care about it. We care about Bitcoin because it was the first implementation of blockchain that brought together a whole bunch of other technologies that had been around for a long time. Okay? Linked timestamping of verifiable logs, Merkle trees go back to the 1980s, digital cash, proof of work, Byzantine fault tolerance, public key identity. All of these technologies have been around for a while before Bitcoin ever existed. Okay? But what the people behind, and I do believe it's people, if you look at this previous thing, there's this person by the name of Satoshi Nakamoto. It's a pseudonym. No one knows who he, she, or they are. I think it's too ingenious an idea to have just one person do it, and I think it was a group of people who came up with this idea. They took a whole bunch of pieces across different technologies and different fields and made the first complete blockchain system. That's why it's important. Okay? I kind of compare it to Edison, right? When Edison was doing his work, he wasn't the only person who was working with arc currents and light bulbs. There were lots and lots of people all around the world, tinkerers, and scientists, and engineers. Westinghouse actually ended up licensing a whole bunch of technology from European innovators that he used to defeat Edison. But what Edison did was he took all these pieces, and he brought them together and said, I have a system that works. Please buy it. There was a fatal flaw in that it only could send power efficiently about 1 mile, which is a great business model because every mile you have to buy a new one of these things, which is what opened the market opportunity for Westinghouse to come along. But by being essentially the first one to kind of market a complete system, that's essentially what Bitcoin is and why we care about it. Okay. So there's a lot of people in the blockchain space who say, this is essentially a trustless system. Right? You'll hear that phrase sometimes, and I disagree fundamentally. I think what blockchain is trust in technology not trust in intermediaries or government. Okay? And what are the pieces that provide that trust in the technology? Obviously, we have the ledger. We have this decentralization of verification rather than centralization through one point of failure. We have public-private key pairs for security and agency. We block the chains together using hashes to tie the transactions together. And it's a combination of these two. The chaining of blocks becomes the blockchain. That's where the name comes from. This down here. And finally, the consensus. Okay? So we're going to spend some time on this stuff because it's really important. Because if you don't trust this, blockchain falls apart. Okay. So this is an example of a company. I mean, earlier I was talking with someone about, Walmart is working with IBM doing some stuff on in their supply chain. This is a company called Ambrosis, competing project. There's like several projects in the food industry. Obviously, Tiye Foods, Ambrosis, a company called Ripe.io. All of them trying to do the same thing. So in this case, we have this premium minced beef, the location of where the farm where the animal was raised, how the animal was transformed in some way in terms of vet checks and these types of things, the production side, the shop side. All this information is available in terms of the life cycle of the animal. Okay? But when you look at their webpage, you'll see something like this. And it has a whole bunch of numbers on it. And it looks really scary. And I'm going to talk about those scary numbers and make them not so scary. Okay? So down here we have recent transactions, and I blew it up here for you. And I know it's still hard to see, but I'll make it bigger later. Okay? So what we have is we have this transaction hash, we have a block number, we have a from number here, a to number here, nectar used, the value. Okay? And similarly, the thing that was in purple on the earlier page, we've got a block number, we've got a block hash, receive time, number of confirmations, the size, the miner, the person who actually did the work, et cetera, et cetera. There's all this extra stuff, uncle hash and state root hash. Okay? So we're going to look at these hashes, and try to make sense of them. Okay? So hashes are fundamental to blockchain. Okay? They're the thing that provides the security and why you can believe that it is, quote, an immutable system. Okay? So hashes are algorithms that are one-way functions, right? In other words, you can get the output from the input, but not the input from the output. Okay? It's one way. The same input will always create the same output. That is really important. Okay? And importantly, the length or complexity of the content does not matter. And I will give you some examples in a minute. There's different algorithms. Okay? MD5, terrible algorithm. MD5 is a very, what it ends up doing is it ends up creating, I'll explain in a second, but why it is that Bitcoin and most other systems are using SHA-256. So that here we have my name, Benjamin M. Cole, without a period versus with a period. Exact same name, the only difference between them is the period after the M. And what you can see is that when it's Benjamin M. Cole without a period, using SHA-256, the string hash for my name is translated into F5D5D8 for blah, blah, blah. Okay? When I add that period, the hash changes to 5BC40690. Okay? Any change in the content changes the hash. Okay? Just keep that in mind. Okay? If I had done this with MD5, MD5 is much, much shorter. Okay? SHA-256 gives us a big string of numbers and letters. MD5 is really, really short. And when it's too short, there's a possibility that the name Fred Flintstone, when hashed, turns into the exact same string. And it's called collision, right? That two different inputs lead to the same output. Probabilistically, it's greater than 0, right? And that's why people use SHA-256. And in fact, Bitcoin takes the SHA, takes the hash, and then takes the hash of the hash, just to be sure. Okay? So this is the Emancipation Proclamation, Bliss copy, if you're a geek. You can take this the entire Emancipation Proclamation, and what does it do when you put it into the SHA-256 algorithm? It spits it out as this. Now, if you have an errant space at the end and run it, it will generate a different hash. Beware. Okay. You can do pictures. This acorn PNG hashed. And I hashed it with two different hashes, the MD5.com one and online MD5. It yields the exact same. This one is for SHA-1. You see how it's shorter? And SHA-256 in red, you see how it's much longer. So the probability of collision is higher when it's a short hash versus a super long one. And as computational power increases, quantum computing, these types of things come online, these hashes are going to get really, 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 really long. Okay? So you can do pictures, you can hash songs, you can hash a movie if it's a digital file. Okay? So I took the 1040, IRS 1040 instruction manual. It's like 200 pages long, right? So it was a PDF file, and I hashed it. And then I said, well, what's going to happen if I change the name of the file? So I changed the name of the file, and I hashed it. What happened? It didn't change the hash because the inside hadn't changed. I said, ooh, important to note. So the file name can be different, but the innards, okay, where it really matters, okay, are going to yield the same hash. And then I took the 1040, and I have Adobe Acrobat, and so I went and changed the 0 to an O. So it was 1040, and then hash that, it creates a new hash. So in a 200-page document, changing one letter changes the hash, but not changing the title. Okay? Now this is helpful. You think about it. If you're an artist or a photographer, you create something, you put it out there on the internet, and someone takes that picture and adds an Instagram filter to it, puts it up. You know if they manipulated it. Why? Because if you run that picture through the hash maker, you know what the hash is. You run the one that was manipulated, you know that there's something been added to the data. Right? That's important if you're a content creator, like a musician, right? Or an artist. Okay? So, I have my stop sign here. Why is hashing needed again? First, it provides proof of existence of a precise instantiation in digital form. Only identical text, photo, etc. yields the same hash. And importantly, if the item hash includes previous transaction information, then a changed hash reveals someone went back and changed something. Okay, so what does that mean? Actually, I have a picture here. Hold on. Oh, good. Okay. So this is a block, and there's transaction. Ben gives a Bitcoin to Alfie. Okay? Transaction 2, Alfie gives a Bitcoin to someone else. That's a different transaction. That's going to be transaction 2, and someone else does something else. Okay? And then all these are brought together into a block, and they're all processed at the same time. When it is processed, you take a hash of all that information, all the transactions, and you include that hash in the next block. Then when you hash this, you add that hash. And that's really, really important. Because if someone comes along and does transactions and then tells everyone in the network, okay, I updated everything, make sure you update like this. If that person is a cheat and tried to go back in time to earlier blocks and change it, all the hashes will change. It's like a butterfly effect. And then everyone in the network, all those other 10,000 computers who get this information will say, this is bogus. It doesn't match the hash that it should be. That means this person manipulated the information way, way, way back. Block it. And don't follow what they say. And that's how it keeps security. Because everyone can just look at the hash of all the previous information. If anything has changed, it's going to change what they're looking at. Like a butterfly effect. Isn't that cool? It's quite ingenious. Quite ingenious. But that's not everything that Satoshi did. That's the first thing. That's really cool. Okay. The second thing is, of course, you can use these hashes to make private key pairs, public-private key pairs. We'll talk about that. And thirdly is you can construct a competition between the network nodes to decide who gets to validate a transaction. Everyone's got their hand up saying, I want to do it, I want to do it. You can actually use hashes to create a competition. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute. Okay? So, public-private key pairs. These are the wallets, what people call digital wallets. You're going to put cryptos in. Okay? So first thing you do is you generate a random number using a secure random number generator. My data says that Bitcoin uses a number between 1 and 1.158 times 10 to the 77th. A pretty big number. Right? Then you take a hash of that number. The private key is the original random number. The public key is the hash. So let's look at this. We got this key pair. You want to keep something private to yourself, and you're going to have something that you're willing to share with other people. What you're willing to share is the hash of your private key. Right? No other information. You can't figure out what the private key is from the public key, which is the hash. Just like you couldn't figure out Benjamin Cole with a dot or without a dot by looking at that weird scribbled number thing that I showed you, right? Okay? So the public key allows someone to put assets into a digital wallet, but cannot remove them. The private key allows people to put both assets in and remove them. Does that make sense? So if someone has your public key, they can give you digital assets, but they can't take them. But if someone gets a hold of your private key, they can take all of your assets. It's like this secret code that opens up everything. It's like your password. Right? And that's this warning. If you reveal your private key to others, they will steal your digital assets. So only like give it to your, the person who's going to take care of you when you, end up in an old folks' home or something like that, right? Your power of attorney or something. It also means that if this guy has your public key, he can give you a Bitcoin and you can't turn it down. Right? Try to explain that to the government. Now, why is he giving you money? Well, he just happened to have it. Right? You can't turn it down if people want to give it to you, if it's a public wallet, the way things work now. Okay? So if we go back to that page I showed you earlier, we had this really weird, ugly thing where we had the transaction hash, we had the block, we had the from, we had the to, we had the nectar use. Well, what is this stuff? The first one is the hash of the transaction. The second one is the public key of the wallet of the sender from this person, send something to this person. This is the other hash. And here's the payment that was used. So in that ugly thing we saw at the beginning, all it is a hash of transactions or a hash of a private wallet or a hash of a private wallet. That's all it is. Does that make sense? I know this is a little overwhelming, but this is important. Okay? This is why you should trust your digital wallet, that it's uncrackable. Right? Now we get to the competition. Now this is really cool. The puzzle that we come up with is we're going to find the first hash with 0000 as the first 4 digits of the hash. So you remember my name? It was like B5, G4 or something like that. Okay, well, we're going to do a hash until it gets 0000. And once you find something that's 0000, you tell everyone, I win, I got the answer. Okay? That's the competition. So what you need is you need the base string, which in the case of a blockchain is a previously successful hash. I showed you that earlier. And finally, you have this thing called a nonce, which is a number used once. Nonce. Okay? And you add that to the end of the base string. So let me give you an example. The base string is hello, comma, space, world, exclamation point. That's the phrase we're going to use as the base string. And the nonce, the random number we're going to use once, we're just going to start at 0 and go up to infinity using integers. Okay, so the first attempt, the base string is hello world, the nonce is 0. If you run this through a SHA-256 hashing algorithm, it will yield this, 1312AF. That's not 0000, let's move on. So now we try hello world 1. It yields E9AF. Nope, that's not what we want. Move on, move on, move on, until we get to hello world 4250. And what does that yield? 0, 0, 0, 0. Holy cow, we got the answer. I got it, guys. I got it. The answer is 4250. Everyone, put that in your computers and verify that it works. You all got the 0, 0, 0, 0? Okay, I get to go. Thank you. And that's how you communicate to everyone in the network that someone has been selected, okay, of all the 10,000 people who all have their hands up who are trying to do the work. The first person to solve the problem gets to go. Isn't that ingenious? It's really, really ingenious. But what is this race to find the nonce? It's called proof of work. And in fact, you probably know it as Bitcoin mining. Bitcoin mining is the race to find the nonce at a given difficulty level. If you want to make it a more difficult, we only did 4250 on an average computer. You can do this in what? 3 seconds? Okay, you got the answer. Well, that's not a very difficult problem. So what you can do is make it more difficult. How do you do that? You have to find the SHA that is 0.0000000000000. Good luck, right? And so what is happening is all these people around the world who are running their computers 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, all that mining that is going on is people trying to find the nonce every 10 minutes so that they get paid for their work. It uses an enormous amount of energy. Right? You might have heard articles about how much energy it uses. Right? It's been compared to countries in terms of the amount of power that it uses. But that was by design. Okay? The reason why they use proof of work was originally developed as an anti-spam measure by computer scientists. When spam was starting to become a huge problem, there's zero marginal cost to sending 1 million emails. And all the computer scientists of the world were like, we have to fix this. This is terrible. Think of what is a DDoS attack? It's a rogue actor who's sending thousands and thousands and thousands of packets to a computer that gets overwhelmed. Every major corporation in the world has been attacked with a DDoS attack. Why? Because to do a DDoS attack, it costs you about $500. Right? That's why that threat is out there. Right? You can't have a distributed system where 10,000 computers running if you can have one person with a computer be able to just constantly be sending messages to everyone without them taking on a cost. So the original idea behind proof of work was that you would only accept an email if they did some sort of computation first, which cost them time or effort or electricity. And then when it arrived, your spam folder would go, oh, they didn't do a computation, throw it in the trash. It's spam. Because if it was a valuable email, you would actually put the money into it to ensure it got sent. Right? So the fact that Bitcoin and all these protocols that use proof of work are taking electricity, that's by design. It's a way to protect the system from billions and billions of billions of just rogue attacks coming in because you can't communicate in the system unless you're doing work. Does that make sense? Yeah, so there's goods and bads of it, yes. Okay, and they're very, very smart people trying to find alternatives to this problem. Okay, but when people talk about Bitcoin mining, you say, oh yeah, that's just looking for the nonce. I got it. Right? You're going to know more than your kids. Okay? Everyone thinks they're like mining Bitcoin. Okay. So some of these other ways that people are trying to solve this problem. Okay? Proof of work is the race to find the nonce. Proof of stake, it kind of mirrors stock awards to managers by firms. Essentially, you have to put up money and lock it into an account. And then if you don't have money, then you can't participate. Because the rationale is that by having the money yourself, you're less likely to undermine it because you'll lose value. You put your money on the table. So you have to have a proof of a stake in the token. Just like you would say you can't vote unless you own shares in a company, right? People who have lots of shares in the company would be more likely to want to protect the company than people who might have only bought one share so they could go into the meeting and participate, right? Proof of burn. It mirrors the stock buyback, okay? You'll see what are called node voting. This happens a lot in private or permission blockchain systems. So there's lots of different ways that people are trying to solve the problems, but Bitcoin and a lot of projects still use proof of work. It's never been hacked. It works, even if it does consume electricity. Okay. Smart contracts. I promised you a couple of slides on smart contracts. So smart contracts are neither smart nor contracts. But they were labeled that a number of years ago. All they are is a script, right? So it's a script that has a conditional statement in it, like an if-then statement. If a condition is met, execute the executable. If not, don't do anything. So if you've ever used Excel where you said, if it's greater than 3, then do this, and if it's less than 2, then you did the equivalent of a smart contract in your Excel. Okay? So examples of how you might use a smart contract. I have them here, these bullet points here. When Bitcoin price is over 10,000, sell 2.5 Bitcoin. Sounds a lot like a limit order to me, right? We've been using limit orders. You can do it at TD Ameritrade if you have a TD Ameritrade account, or you can use a limit order. We've been using it for a long time. That's a smart contract. Here are the conditions. If the conditions are met, please execute. Okay? When a hurricane rating is over 4, stop a shipment. That might be helpful. Right? When a politician votes yes on HR 2751, make a political donation of $10 to the politician and email the accountant for tax purposes. Right? If a farmer sees 30 days straight of 100-degree temperature or higher, please pay an insurance policy, a precipitation insurance policy, right? Lots of ways it could be used. And of course, it begs the question, so what data are we going to use to make the determination, right? Weather. Are we going to use the NOAA data or the Weather Channel? Does it matter? Yes. So the counterparties who are engaged in making the smart contract have to agree on the data source. Okay? And so you're going to start to hear phrasing like an oracle, a data oracle. All that means is there's a data source that exists out there, and you've taken it and made it so it can communicate with the blockchain, with the smart contract. Okay? They talk about oracleizing data. But your companies already do this. If you're using API keys, that's all this is. But you have to make the API key communicate to something that is sitting on a blockchain somewhere as a smart contract. Okay? Now, of course, when you create these contracts, you can actually string them together to create cascades of contracts. So if a condition is met, the condition is that this other contract executes. Right? So if you thought the derivatives problem was bad, wait until we have about 2 million smart contracts sitting out there in the cloud, waiting to execute when something happens. Once you build that contract and put it into the ether world, if you don't have a way of shutting it down, it does not shut down. It will just sit there and wait until the condition comes. So you need to be very smart of how you program your smart contracts. There has to be a way of shutting it down. If a counterparty says, well, let's make a clause in there that both of us have to sign off and we can shut it off. Well, that would matter. But right now, the court can't shut it down. Right? So if a company goes bankrupt, what usually happens? Right? The court freezes all assets. You going to freeze that sucker? Well, you have to program it properly. Okay. So this oracles, right? Outside data streams can be accessed via API. You're going to use the NOAA data, congressional votes, vehicular systems. I see the airbag has deployed. When that goes off, a smart contract happens. Prepare the hospitals. Right? Something like that. Okay. Starts to take humans out of a lot of decisions. Right? And these smart contracts can be loaded with cryptocurrencies to execute trades. So you can imagine going into your house one day and saying, Alexa, I just read an article about green power and I'm feeling very green. Please go out and find me the greenest power you can for our home. And Alexa will go, yes, sir. And Alexa, as your home, with its built-in crypto wallet, will go out into the energy market and buy power according to that energy profile. And then you're going to have a slow month. And you're going to come home and say, Alexa, I know I was feeling really green last month, but I'm kind of poor this month. Just find me cheap power, please. And she'll say, okay. And she'll go and buy power according to that profile. That will start happening within 10 years. If you've been following what's going on with AI and with machine learning, right, you're going to be talking to your houses to do things like buy power. Pretty scary stuff. All this is happening really fast and at the same time, and it is frightening, especially if smart people aren't thinking about the ethics and the implications of some of these technologies. Okay? So, obviously, the quality of the data matters if contracts are going to be executed. Right? So what would happen if that vet tech had an empty bottle of the proper medicine that she always scanned but was really giving other medicine? Well, the only way you're going to catch that is going and doing actual observation and site visits and things like that. The data that she's putting by scanning what she claims is the actual medicine, that's the stuff that goes onto the blockchain, right? But the blockchain is just this essentially data source. If the data is bad when it's going on there, you're still going to be using bad data. Right? So you have to be clear on what the data is, and there's a lot of different layers you're going to have to add, random site visits and these types of things to make sure that the data that you are putting onto the blockchain is clean data, can be used properly. Okay? It's inevitable that we're going to start to see reputation scores for media sources or data sources. So if you were to choose, like what's a 5-star media source that you would execute a contract on, would the New York Times fall into that? It's a pretty good newspaper. But you think about how many times they've had to do a retraction or a modification to the language, it wasn't quite right. Well, imagine if it actually executed a contract based off of the original declaration, right? Are you going to penalize in the future that star rating that you gave New York Times if it keeps repeatedly messing up? Yeah, probably. Right? So what we're going to start to see is actually like reputation scores for data sources. Just like business schools have rankings, where we're going to start seeing this for all data sources, right? Which creates a new industry. How do we rate this? How do we audit this stuff? Right? So blockchain is opening a lot of avenues. Okay. So at heart, blockchain is a distributed ledger, but it is not only a distributed ledger. It's a sociotechnical system. Just like when you say stock market is not just stocks. It means a bunch of other stuff, right, when people talk about the stock market. Technically, stock market does not include bonds. It's only stocks, right? That's if you're being pedantic. A blockchain is just a decentralized ledger. But when you think holistically about the entire system, it's not. Right? It's much more. Right? First, it creates trust through technology, not trust through intermediaries or government. Right? Each of these blocks contains a reference to the prior block. All content is protected by encryption and auditable, and it's algorithmically defined store of value. This is really important. Okay? Blockchain solved the Napster problem. Okay? If I have a digital song and I give it to him, is there anything stopping me from taking that exact same song and giving it to him? No, that's the problem of Napster, right? That a digital asset could be copied infinitely and distributed to everyone. That's a problem. You can't have that if you're going to have a Bitcoin, right? I can't give him the Bitcoin and then turn around and give the same Bitcoin to him. Right? It has to be irrevocable transfer of a digital asset. And once it's in his encrypted wallet, behind his private key, I no longer control it. This is what's known as the double spend problem in economics. Okay? It's a problem of digital cash. I can't have digital cash, give it to you, and I could take the exact same copy and give it to someone else. It has to be irrevocable. So what blockchain did is it made digital scarcity possible. And that's a big deal. Right? So economists will call that the double spend problem. In the blockchain space, they refer to it as the double spend problem. I call it the Napster problem because I'm a normal human. Okay. It legitimized digital representation of value to pay for upkeep of a distributed network. Right? So think about Bitcoin. It's so weird. So they create this protocol and they say, yeah, just run it on your computers. And if you make a transaction on it, we're going to pay you with a Bitcoin. What's it worth? They're like, it doesn't matter. We're just going to pay it to you. Eventually, people will like it, and they'll start to put value on it. And they're like, okay, cool. And so you had a whole bunch of geeks working in their garage who start doing this and mining. The original Bitcoin, if you did a transaction, your original payment for the first miners was 50 Bitcoin for transactions. That's why there was someone who bought a pizza for 10,000 Bitcoin. Okay, go back about 9 years. Bitcoin just had its birthday a couple of days ago. Okay, but someone bought a pizza for 10,000 Bitcoin. It's a lot of money these days, right? It's trading about $6,000 today. Right? So what ended up happening was you had these digital assets that no one would value. I mean, why would you value solar coins? Right? I mean, it's just a system that gives these tokens to someone if they run a solar array. But there's a market for it. People saw value in this and said, this is important, I want to support it. And it started to get value. And people started buying and trading them. And Bitcoin went to almost $20,000 last year. It's crazy. Or maybe not. If you value the technology and say, this is going to change the world, is it any different than someone who pays $120 million for a Jackson Pollock painting? Right? If I show it to my little sister, she's just like, what is that? I could do that. Someone paid $120 million for it? No, it's $125 million for that. And what are they going to do? They're going to either hang it in their apartment or they're going to store it away somewhere. And when they sell it, they hope that it's worth something more than what they paid. Right? Well, it's kind of like the way that I view digital assets. Right? This is a $40 billion digital item market out there. Okay? People buying digital swords to play games. I'm not kidding. Okay? There was a game that was called World of Warcraft. Okay? And it's like a Dungeons and Dragons type game, and you go on there, you can kill monsters, and you can do a whole bunch of stuff. And Americans are lazy, and so they're like, I don't want to spend all this time to do work to get cool characters and cool swords. I just want to buy the gold with cash so I can buy a cool sword. And so what ended up happening was, in China, people set up these buildings, put in a T1 internet line, and paid high school kids to click to mine digital gold in this video game. Right? And when I shared this story in my class, one of my undergraduate students raised his hand and said, Professor, I used to do that in high school in China. And what I would do is I would go and I would sit there all day, 8 hours, and I would mine in this digital world. And then I would meet, my character would go and meet my boss, who's sitting across the room from me, in digital space. I would give him my gold in digital space, and he would walk from his desk over to me and give me cash, and I would go out and eat ramen with my friends. And that boss would aggregate all of this digital gold and would go onto eBay and sell it to Americans who are using their US credit cards to buy digital gold. This was well before Bitcoin and all these cryptos were happening. There is a market for digital assets. And it doesn't matter if Wall Street doesn't get it. It doesn't matter if your great aunt doesn't get it. You're like, why would you spend money on this? People do spend money on it, hundreds of dollars, thousands of dollars, right? These huge markets. And so what ended up happening as a result of these digital assets, and they're going to become more and more important, right? That people were actually buying with real US dollars on eBay. Now there are dedicated exchanges for these digital assets. Hundreds of them around the world. And you can go on there and you can buy a Bitcoin or an Ether or any number of other things. And eventually you'll be able to buy a tokenized part of a timeshare. Your frequent flyer miles will be digitized. You know, people do sell their frequent flyer miles, right? I'll buy you a ticket, that type of thing. Well, there's already these markets for frequent flyer miles, digital gold. Doesn't it make sense that these other assets that are actually backed by cryptography, not World of Warcraft? What's the problem with mining World of Warcraft gold is there's a company who built the game. So what's stopping the people who work at that company from just giving their friends $1 billion in gold? Right? This gets to the heart of what money is. We generally trust the government to be the one who says how much money we're going to have in the money supply. You don't have just a private company determining behind the scenes they're going to give $1 billion worth of gold to their friends. We have a government or a Federal Reserve that does that, right? And we're very lucky in the United States that we actually trust our system in general. But everywhere in the world, every 13 to 15 months, there is a currency crisis somewhere. You've been paying attention to what's been going on in Zimbabwe for the past decade? Venezuela? Right? There's a lot of countries where the monetary system does not function properly. And in those types of countries where you can't trust your own government to do what's right, you're going to start to see these types of currencies, these types of assets actually replacing them. Right? We're already starting to see it. So blockchain helped to codify rules for handling upkeep and conflict. It attracted these exchanges that I talked about, these kind of complementary assets. And there are some various projects that are working on what's called atomic swaps, which is the ability to trade directly with another person without going through an exchange. So you'll start to hear about these. One of the biggest projects is called the Komodo Project, and it specializes in what are called atomic swaps, atomic actors swapping digital currencies. So if you ever hear that term, you now know what it is. It's not that fancy. They just use a lot of weird jargon in this space. Okay. Here's my World of Warcraft gold and my students. And finally, it can facilitate micropayments that are too costly historically to do. So I have a friend who used to work in A&R at Sony Music, and she was involved with some artists. And because she was a producer on their albums, she would receive a check just randomly in the mail every time the amount got to $1,000. So when it got to $1,000, she would get a check. But the entire time it's accumulating to get to $1,000, the company who collected that money is just making interest from it. Right? That's part of the way that they make money. Is they say, oh, it's too expensive to give you a check every penny, so we're going to wait till it gets to a certain threshold, then we're going to pay you. There's a lot of systems that act like this. Well, what blockchain can do is they say every time a song is played, a digital currency is paid to you as it is used. Per usage fees in micropayments. And this is why it's important when you think about even just like Bitcoin as an example. I was talking with someone once and they were like, you know, oh, Bitcoin is $10,000. I can't afford that. And I said, well, then buy 0.00001 Bitcoin. They're like, you can do that? I was like, yeah. Bitcoin is, it's like 8 decimal places. You can buy $50 with a Bitcoin if you want. You don't have to buy $10,000. It's different than a stock. The stock, you can't buy these micro shares. You buy a stock, right? But with digital assets, you can get just a micro segment of it, and therefore you can do these micropayments. You'll also start to see these micro-assetization. I really think that the entire world is going to be tokenized. Anything that could be sold in a market, real estate, swaps, all that, it's all going to be digitized in tokens. All right. And importantly, you can also do things like control your identity. Right? So think about the Equifax hack. Right? 1/2 of the US population was hacked. You have no legal rights to actually tell Equifax to remove your information from their data set. They own that. Even though they have compromised you, you cannot tell them legally, please remove me from your data set. Right? It's even difficult to get them to change your address if it's a typo. Believe me, they think I lived in Idaho at some point. I never lived in Idaho. Evidently, there was a Benjamin Cole who lived in Idaho back in the 90s. And it shows up on my credit report. And I'm like, that's not me. And they're like, well, our database shows that it is. And I keep requesting, please remove it. And they don't have to. They have no obligation to do so. Right? They are convinced. So what this type of tokens can allow us to happen, the tokens I've been talking about are tokens that can be bought and sold and traded. There are going to be what are called identity tokens that cannot be given to other people. They're non-fungible tokens that will capture your data, like did you graduate from college? Okay, that information. Did you go to medical school? Are you up to date on all of your continuing education? All of that information will be attached to you like a social security number, and it's non-fungible. And then you can use that information to actually monetize it for yourself. So I read a really interesting article about this lady. I think she's from Boston. And she had some sort of genetic, I think her mother had a particular disease, right? And are you all familiar with 23andMe and Ancestry.com? Do you understand what the business model is? Does anyone work in that industry? Okay. So the business model is, you'll see the commercials a lot during the Christmas time. Share it with your family. Okay. So what they do is you pay them money, $99, $59 on Christmas sale, and you swab your mouth, and they take that information, and they run a genetic sequence on it, and they collect your genetic information. As soon as they do that, that becomes their property. And they turn around and sell that data to pharmaceutical companies to develop drugs. So every time they're out there, they're appealing to your sense of identity. They're appeal to your desire to know something about yourself. But what they're actually doing is getting you to give up your digital genetic information in perpetuity. And if both you and your husband or wife do this, then they have all the information for your children as well. Right? If you read the 10 Qs of these companies, it says if they go bankrupt or are taken over, those assets are just like any other property. It just gets sold to someone. That data is now theirs forever, and you can never get it back. Okay? Now, this lady who had this predisposition because of her mother, several of these companies were coming to her, asking her, please participate in our study. We need your information. And she agreed to sell her data for $50 because that was the average cost of her monthly medicine. Immediately after you say $50, sure, thank you so much. Immediately after they did her genetic information, they turned around and sold it for $7,000 to a pharmaceutical company. And they could continue to sell it to any number of companies forever. Now, would that woman have agreed to sell it for $50 if she knew that it was worth $7,000? No, of course not. So the information asymmetry played a role. But could you imagine saying, yes, I will let you own it, but only for this purpose. And it is revocable after that. So then you can decide how you want your individual level information to be used. Right? So think about Facebook. I write pretty good Facebook posts, and people like them. I'm so happy when someone likes. Right? But every time I write on Facebook, you know who makes money? Facebook. Not me. Facebook makes money. Right? Wouldn't it be great if when I posted something that I actually made money? Right? But that's not the way the system is built. What blockchain is actually going to be able to do is allow you at an individual level to get micropayments for your contributions. All different things open up. It's going to be very, 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 very exciting. So Alfie mentioned this a little earlier about some of the stuff we're doing at Fordham. Fordham has a secondary concentration in blockchain. We have 12 credits worth of courses, and if you take 9 of those credits, you can earn a secondary concentration. We actually have 4 different areas offering 5 different courses. My class is in strategy, and actually you got to see some of my slides today. What we do is we look at industries. How does the energy industry make money now, and how will blockchain change that? How does the insurance industry make money now? How will blockchain change that? How does the digital advertising market work? How is blockchain going to change it? So we attack different industries. We look at it from an industry analysis. The finance area has a couple of courses on crypto economics and tokenization. Information systems has a DApp development course. And then we have a course in the law and ethics department that's joint with the Fordham Law School. If you're interested in how blockchain is being used in humanitarian efforts, we actually have a summit coming up very soon. Welcome to come to New York. It's awesome. This time of the year, all the lights get out, and it's quite beautiful. You can see the rockets. Humanitarian Blockchain Summit is December 7th, and then my conference is going to be on June 1st of 2019 in Manhattan. And you're welcome to come. So we actually have proof of real learning of our conference. This question was, what is your comfort? Please use the slider to rate your knowledge of blockchain before and after the conference. And we can see that this is knowledge of the blockchain before and after, and also similarly, confidence in holding conversations about blockchain. And by the end of the day, the first day, people were actually talking with industry members using language like proof of work and nonces. It was really exciting, and I was super happy that so many people enjoyed themselves. So please do come to Manhattan if you're ever there. I'm pretty easy to find, not that many Ben Coles at Fordham. Thank you very much. I appreciate your time. So I am ready for your questions. Yes? Well, you know, so the comment is about how blockchain is being used in food companies, and it seems like it might take a lot of infrastructure to pull it off. Actually, the only thing it requires is those for Tiye Foods, it requires the QR codes and the hand scanners. That's it. And then just training the employees to make sure that they religiously follow through when they're doing these types of things. There are other companies that are trying to work within the way the company already collects its own data, like Ripe.io. I was the other day actually meeting with the CEO of the company, and he was, he's like, we don't want to actually have to use extra devices and these other things. We want to work with the systems they already have and try to help them capture the information through IoT devices and these types of things instead. So you could put devices in orchards, and you would know when apples were grown, because the same maturation level, and one apple might be 100 days older than another apple, and with that information, you know, okay, this can't survive a 2-month trip on a boat to China. We should take this one to Texas and take this one to China, you know, that type of thing. So using IoT devices to collect the data at the point, Internet of Things devices to collect the data at the point where where the produce and these types of things are being made. Yeah, a whole bunch of other hands went up here. Let's go with this gentleman here. Right. Okay. So I'm going to repeat the question. I don't know if everyone can hear it. If there's all these benefits of blockchain that are going to be coming, why is it taking 10 years? You know, and I think that part of it is because the first people who were doing blockchain were just a whole bunch of weird geeks, right? Yeah, but I think that it started getting used in certain ways. So it was used a lot in, for example, Silk Road and things like that. So it was being used in nefarious ways, and that kind of created this kind of negative tinge around it. And companies didn't want to go anywhere near something that could be, linked with crime and child pornography and drugs and arms deals and things like that. And so companies were kind of keeping away from it. And then what happened was people started just talking about it around the water cooler and saying, no, it's much bigger than Bitcoin. Forget Bitcoin. here's what it actually means. And when people who actually spent time digging into the space said, here's what it could really mean, that's when people started saying, okay, let's dabble. Let's experiment. And so actually you have seen over the past 4 or 5 years, a lot of companies doing experiments. But the issue is for companies, it has to be scalable to millions of transactions a day. And it just can't get that level using a public blockchain the way it's orchestrated now, which is why most enterprise projects that you're going to see are going to actually be private blockchains. So you don't have to worry about having it go out to all these people to verify. You basically just designate someone who's going to verify. It'll be myself and a couple of suppliers having a relationship, and we'll just all agree that it will be verified instantaneously or something like that. So, well, no, but it's not relying on the fact that you don't, how would I say this? Blockchain as it was originally developed was premised on the fact that the counterparties to the transaction may not know each other. So if you don't know them, you don't know anything about them, can you trust them? Well, we just use the technology to ensure that it's irrevocable transfer of assets and these types of things. But you don't need that level if you're going to do an industry level, because they're already doing interactions every day. And so this is essentially where industry has come around to, and there's a lot of permissioned blockchains and private blockchains that are just basically said, we don't need that. We already have relationships, so we'll just rely on that. And the only thing we need is the blocks and the fact that we can all look at the same data. So a really good example is the CEO from Ripe. He said, if you think about food, what date is it that everyone knows about their food? The date in which it's going to make you sick, the expiration date. Is like, as a consumer, I don't need to know that. What I want to know is when is it going to be the tastiest? But that information isn't available, right? The information we provide to customers is only, if you eat this, you're going to get sick. But they don't tell you the prime time to eat the food. And it's only by having this information and collecting it across the entire supply chain that you can aggregate it and then use that information plus the IoT information to say, wow, look at this data. Here's where we can actually start to provide suggestions about how we could use, how people could use this. So a chef might have the apple at the exact moment when it's the tastiest. And is there willingness to pay for that? Yes. For elite chefs, without doubt. They want the freshest food. They want it at the prime ripeness. Does that matter if you're going to make a Cheeto? Maybe not, because it's all going to be mixed in with a whole bunch of other stuff, and you don't need that level of acuity. So the question is, where's the willingness to pay, and can the data provide that? And I think companies are now realizing how it can be used, which is why you're going to start to see a lot of really big projects over the next couple of years. You're going to hear about them literally every month as they get unfolded here. Yes, here.
You mentioned the energy intensive.
I don't want to get too technical on you, but what has happened is, so right now, for example, Bitcoin takes all the transactions every 10 minutes and aggregates them all into a block, and it passes that block to the person who wins the race for the nodes, who does the transactions. But what you can do now, there's other projects that are out there. One's called the Lightning Network Project. And what it allows you to do is, if you know who your counterparty is I'm going to do a transaction with you, and I'm going to do lots of transactions with you, I can actually create a smart contract where I put the money in there, and we don't close out the contract. And it just holds it in the contract safely for you. You know that it's held safely, but the transaction actually hasn't gone into the network. And we can have thousands of transactions back and forth, back and forth, back and forth, and then we say, finally, our relationship is done. And then only at the end, all of those transactions are then all done together in one batch. So this is a way that has actually been created to get around the fact that you don't want to have to pay a fee every single time for every microtransaction. Like every time you go to buy a coffee, it doesn't make sense to buy a coffee with crypto if the cost of doing the transaction is higher than a cup of coffee, right? That doesn't make any sense, right? So the way that you would do this is actually use these, what are called these transaction channels or smart contract channels. And that's what you would do. If I always go to the same coffee shop, I will open a smart contract with the coffee shop. It could be in perpetuity. And the exchange would happen there, and only once a year would they close it and say, we'll take the money. But I can't pull it back out. But it's actually finalized in the blockchain until the person who wants to pull it out wants to pull it out. Does that make sense? So if you're interested, you should look at the Lightning Network and some of these other things, because people are really trying to solve these problems. A lot of really interesting ideas. Whole bunch of other hands here. Yes, ma'am? Yeah, if you go back to you go back in history and you think about companies, I mean, companies were chartered for a particular purpose and then they were dissolved. It's only a modern day invention, this idea of a company existing for hundreds and hundreds of years. Most companies were just created for a specific purpose and then the charter was dissolved. So we're kind of going back to the possibility of that. It's very interesting, if you're interested in this space, there's a company, well, everyone knows Overstock.com. You've heard of it? Okay, Overstock.com is one of the leaders in the crypto space in the world. The CEO is a very forward-thinking person. If you go to Overstock.com, you can use over 50 different cryptos to buy things like, lamps. It's really remarkable. But one of the things that Overstock did, I want to say it was probably 3 years ago, they actually had a $25 million bond offering where they made 25 $1 million tokens, bond tokens, that they sold to raise money, and the token would then get the interest. Right? So they actually did this several years ago, well before it was really on the radar screen of other people. So they're behind a very important project called the T0 project, which is trying to create the equivalent of a New York Stock Exchange for tokens, the T0 project. So if you're interested, you can look up about that bond offering. Just Google it, and then of course the T0 project as well. Yeah. Other ones back here in the back. Yeah, it's a great. So his question is about regulations. Yeah, I was just in Washington D.C. It was last week. Wow, last week it was a FinTech week. Really amazing. It was put on by Georgetown Law School and the IMF, and the entire week was just regulators talking about this space, and then companies. And so we're seeing a lot of clarity coming out of the SEC, the CTFC, OCC, especially on the banking side. Anyone who's doing a project now that is like a token launch, it's being treated as the equivalent of doing like an IPO. So this is creating a whole bunch of extra costs for the companies, but they're trying to be careful that they don't kill off all the blockchain in the United States. But I really do think that the regulators are understanding of the need and are trying to just protect investors. And they're like, how can we protect people? So there might be a project that, for example, said, we're not going to allow any American investors to invest in it. And they'll do their launch overseas, but immediately they start trading in overseas exchanges, and I can access it as an American. Well, then you haven't prevented me from doing so. This is the equivalent of making it offering to an American. Therefore, you're under US securities law as a result. So this is causing people to create smart contracts that lock in the tokens that can't be traded for 6 months or a year, and these types of things. So you're seeing some innovation in how people are working. And SEC actually has a dedicated office, and they meet with at least 2 blockchain companies every day who are going to them and saying, here's what we're thinking, is this legal? And they're providing guidance to them about how they can create the space. And they said, 2 years ago, the people who were showing up were all in jeans and t-shirts. Nowadays, they might show up in jeans and t-shirts, but they got 3 lawyers with them. So we're starting to see a little bit more attentiveness to the legal liabilities in this space, and I think that there's no one in this space now who can act the way they were doing 2 years ago, without doubt. And that's good for investors. It is good for investors. It helps protect people. Yeah. Other questions here? Yes, ma'am.
Do you see any implications?
Oh, of course. Yeah. There's actually I think MIT is actually. I don't know if they're doing it for all students, but they are providing essentially digital diplomas on the blockchain now to students. And you'll start to see this with medical schools as well. I mean, where are you actually a trained doctor? Where's your license? All that information, it goes along with the identity token thing I was talking about, that we're going to start to see this information being aggregated onto a particular blockchain. So in terms of projects, there's a project that Consensus is working on. It's called Uport, U-P-O-R-T. And it's basically a way that you can start to aggregate some of your personal information, and then you can provide only what's necessary. So, for example, if I go to a bar, the only information they need to know about me is I'm over 21. They don't need to know my home address. They don't need to know if I'm a transitioned male or female. They don't need to know any of this they don't need to know any of the information. They need to know that I am just 21. And so by using blockchain and these type of identity tokens, you can say, look, this is verifiable, I am 21, that's all you need to know. I don't want you with a photographic memory looking at my home address, right? You can provide the information you want. And so you're going to start to see this, and people start to use these types of projects to aggregate their information and provide what they would wish to provide to other people. Yeah?
I'm talking more about
Insurance markets. There's a very good project, just won an award in Europe called Etherisk, ETHERISC. It's an insurance company, and it's travel insurance. Did your flight take off or not? If not, then you pay, that type of thing. So you're going to see it in insurance markets where you have a dichotomous outcome, yes, no, not the assessment side. It's like how much damage happened. You still have to have an assessor go out and assess it. But if it's like, did this hit that location? Yes, no. Dichotomous is very easy to do with a smart contract. Things that require subjective assessments, more difficult. That's a good question. So the question is, Bitcoin, despite it having such a dominance in the market, has really not been able to become a digital currency. I actually consider Bitcoin to be digital gold. This is like a philosophical discussion. But in terms of currency, there are projects that try to fix problems. The brilliant thing about all these public blockchains is all the code, all the protocols and everything were available publicly. You can download Bitcoin and say, I don't like the fact it does it every 10 minutes. I want to do the transactions every 3 minutes. Change it, create your own token, and launch it. And if people believe that's something worthwhile, they're going to support that. And that is what Bitcoin Cash is. That's what Bitcoin Gold is, Bitcoin Diamond. All of those derivatives are actually taking the original Bitcoin protocol and modifying some of the parameters and then launching a different token. Literally, that's what happened. They changed the transaction block size. They changed the timing of the blocks, those types of things. So there are people who try to fix that. There are other projects that, like I mentioned Dash earlier, the people behind Dash sat down and said, here's all the problems with Bitcoin and why it could never be a currency. We're going to try to solve it. And they sat down and reconstructed it and tried to make something that they thought could be a digital currency. So I think Dash actually is pretty darn good. They are able to speed things up because they use super nodes. In order to be a super node, you have to have 1,000 Dash, own 1,000 Dash, and so you have some sort of stake in the token. So Dash is pretty cool. I think Digibyte is pretty cool. In Asia, you're seeing, what else? Pardon me? Tron? Don't get me started about Tron. But there was one I was going to mention. I think you're going to see Acoin. It does not exist yet, but Acoin, do you know that musical artist Acoin? He's been involved with an electrification project in Africa, and he's brought electricity into using solar panel arrays in 16 countries in Africa. There's like 1 million people using electricity that Acoin put into the world. And his next step is you already have these people who are using the electricity and they don't trust their governments. He's going to launch a token that's going to call it Acoin in these countries where he already has built these things. He's built schools to help young men and women to learn how to repair the solar arrays. These types of things. So he's thinking holistically about how he wants to rebuild things. And so I think within 5 years, Acoin will actually be fairly widely used in those communities that are already using this. Even though it doesn't exist now, that man has a lot of pull in Africa when he shows up and wants to do things because of his successes he's had in the electrification projects. So look out for that. Also, a very interesting one is the Barbadian dollar is now going to be a crypto. It was just announced the other day by the leader of the country, and they're using a project called BIT, B-I-T-T. So you might want to look into that because it's a pretty cool project. That's it. Okay, great. Thank you so much. I realize I went over on my talk because I started talking about things like Experian and things, but it's important because it kind of helps you contextualize of how all this is going to fit together. Thank you for your patience. I hope you enjoyed it. And come talk to me privately. Thank you.